you have an agenda for today?
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't have an agenda. We should probably start with proposals. I guess the first one would be, since we have the Wysaurus guys here, to maybe talk a little more model talk, essentially, about the differences we see in Wysaurus versus other features and modeling we've talked about. Try to align a little more there. That's one thing I propose.
One thing we could also talk about, oh, go ahead.
I thought we had a demo today.
I don't think so. I
Okay,
don't
I'm
remember
wrong.
one.
Okay.
One of the things we could
I would love to see a demo though from you, Marc-Antoine.
I can show things which are not exactly relevant. I certainly have a lot to say about modeling, so that's fine.
Perfect. Sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
Oh, we could also debrief from the OGM call that many of us were a part of as well, given that, they're stewarding community, much like we're also stewarding community. So that could be something too.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we could do start with a report there. Yeah.
Yeah, if it was relatively short.
I know, right? Well, and that's the thing too, that there wasn't a lot of opportunity for synthesis, and we were in different groups. Like, we did give updates, but it wasn't like, so because what I'm interested in is, like, how did the process of stewarding community actually go? Like, we know these are preliminary conversations. We ourselves amongst community know what preliminary conversations are like. You're kind of sharing a bunch of ideas, and there's some overlap, and you're recognizing there's overlap. But really, it's like, for me, I'm interested in, like, how was the process for a lot of people? Do they felt like they got somewhere? And how could we apply that in our group? Or what can we take from our group and apply it to that?
So any observations from what they did? I didn't attend. Yeah, I didn't attend, so.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to get stuff on the calendar.
Or anyone who did, Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, I could. Our conversation went a bit all over the place. Okay, basically, first framing. Everybody had prepared, like, this is what we think OGM could or should be. So everybody had a basic things to put on the table. The community is very diverse. There's a lot of practitioners who are not necessarily tech people, but practitioners of either connected intelligence, group processes, systemic thinking, collective intelligence. And so it's a diverse community. That's what was interesting. Now, in each small group, there may or may not have been people representing each of this huge diversity of approaches. Some of the groups focused more, including the Wysaurus group, but try to say, okay, what is one possible? And I was in the group with Jerry, so we were more, what's the big picture? And there were a lot of strong voices between Joe with a very strong voice. He's the pedagogy person. Charles Blass is part of Kaiko Lab. So there were a lot of people with a lot to offer. But I think that one thing Jerry said, and that was, and I did harp on it a few times because I think it was a key, what the question was, what is OGM about? And at some point, Jerry said in so many words, OGM is about connecting. We're connecting connectors, we're connecting, I said it as viewpoints, we're connecting knowledge, we're connecting methods, we're connecting communities. And I think that was very key. Now, how does that take form concretely? One thing I was bringing in, but when actually Pete Kaminsky brought in and I very much worked on making it possible, we're working on a kind of wiki of patterns emerging from our various practices and tools. So that's something I need to spend more time on. Semantic media wiki doesn't matter the technique, but the idea of trying to become a community of practice of connected thinking. I think that was, everybody focused on we're a community of practice around this. And we have a diversity of approaches, and that's fine. We are not trying to converge on the one approach that will solve all problems. But we are trying to see which of our approaches are complementary, which can learn from one another. And the whole question for the OGM community is, are we offering a service ourselves? Or are we just an umbrella organization for people offering these connecting services? And that was the question, and people had different viewpoints about that. So are we guilds? Are we making an offering? Certainly there's this idea that we want to be part of the solution as a group and not just as an umbrella of groups who are part of the solution. But how will that manifest? Jamie's group had a lot to say about that, actually. So maybe you should take on, but I think that was my grand overview of what it was about.
Yeah, so what my group did specifically is so I think it was Josh, you presented Ysaurus. And I think I even told you like, yeah, we're all coming together to like take our thing that we've worked on and like submit it to the group, like go full ham. And then in the beginning of the meeting, they kind of like said, don't do that. So I was like, oh, okay, we're not gonna show our stuff this time. And so when I found out that Ysaurus did show their stuff, I was like, but wait, I want to show the Society Library. And then that was like a really personal like tension. So I was like, you know what, let me be radically honest about this tension. Hey group, this is what I'm feeling. And I bet this whole community is feeling it. So the second half of the whole conversation, we talked about tensions within the community, and that allowed us to orient towards how the community could organize to solve those tensions, which led to some of the same conclusions that other people were leading to, that it's essentially a community of practitioners, but it led to some other like solutions as well. So what we identified as being like some of the tensions is, you know, who gets the funding? If we're all working together, like, should we be sharing who is seeking funding from whom? Should we be collaborating in order to get funding? So that was like one tension. Another tension is vying for the attention of our projects. Like Jerry hosts essentially show and tell, but they're like hours long. And I'm not gonna watch every hour's worth of everyone's stuff. But if we had a show and tell where it's like, this is the container in which it is appropriate to totally promote your stuff, we all get an opportunity to share and everyone gets to see everyone else's stuff. And it's not like a huge time cost of like literally 30 hours to see everyone's projects, but instead it's like a couple hours, 15 minutes, show and tell. Great. We're all on the same page as to where people are at, what they're interested in, whatever. So show and tell is a solution for the vying for attention of projects, because even though I told you guys like, yeah, go Ysaurus, like show your stuff, when they were like, we're not promoting our individual projects in this session, I was like, okay, we won't do that. And then it happened. I'm like, but wait, I want to do it too now. It was like an immediate, like, can't be left out, which is just a human, you know, thing with someone who's like put so much energy and work into their work. The other tensions were, of course, things we've talked about here in CDL, which is crowdsourcing versus curation. And, oh yeah, open source versus proprietary. And so one of the things that we suggested as a solution to that is that maybe OGM should actually just be the host of a directory of projects. The projects can determine their boundaries, right? Like if you want to engage and volunteer, you have to sign an NDA. If you are crowdsourcing, if you're curation, if you've fundraised, if you've not fundraised, like essentially a directory of all these projects, much like the Civic Tech Field Guide, like combined with like couchsurfing.org of projects. So people can just browse, and instead of having to like have such a time cost of like having these meetings and getting to know each other and then like having calls outside of the meetings to talk and get the down low, like, hey, are you hiring, or hey, are you doing this? Just maintaining a directory of projects and where they're at. To enable more collaboration, establish boundaries, and then just sort people into their guilds or groups of people who just implicitly, you know, already agree with crowdsourcing or already agree with curation or whatever. So that was our contribution in terms of that, or like community functioning much better, and it was just oriented around resolving tensions. So yeah.
The OGM didn't decide what it is yet.
No.
What is the connecting thread here? Like what at least, like I kind of know what drew me to it, which would be the video. And it seems like somehow shared knowledge, but go ahead. What is the thread that connects all this together?
One thing I can share to give some context about what happened in my group, and every group had a different, you know, cocktail of people. But, you know, the conversation was really quite abstract. And when, you know, it took a long time for it to get to nuts and bolts. But at some point, you know, in the midst there, people were talking about how they came to it and talking a little bit about themselves. And something occurred, which I think is a really good signal for CDL and for all of us. I didn't really do anything. I just pasted a link into the chat, and and it was this fellow Scott who picked up on it. And the idea of using that as a vehicle for our presentation really came from him and not me. And it was really quite, I mean, it was a good sign, I think, of the, and he's, you know, just one person. The other people in the group were into it too. But following his lead, I think it's just a good sign, I think, of a connection between this group and that group. You know, that was a cool, that was a cool thing.
Yeah, and it's a good sign that like Y-Source is a good product. Like if you were able to apply it within the group and use it, then that's a good sign for that too.
Yeah, let me try and tap a little deeper into Tim's question. So the thread for OGM really is people trying to improve the world. It's not, and then Jerry himself and a large contingent has to prove.
Yeah, is it specifically through like shared knowledge or accumulated knowledge, or is it just any way?
Not exclusively. It has a heavy lean towards that way, but there are a lot of people in the group that will use that to help them, but their focus is food, is environment. There's a lot of
he had a climate change track or something, right?
Right. Yeah. So that all deals with that. And Jerry's big thing is collective intelligence. So that's a huge part of it. But I don't think it would be fair to the group to say it's about collective intelligence technologies.
You know, I started, when I said, let me frame, I said, it's a community of connectors, people doing connected thinking, systems thinking, collective intelligence. I mean, this is what it is. I mean, Jerry's core practice is, I call it connected thinking. I mean, he uses the brain, which is basically a kind of souped up mind map graph, or rather concept graph with pretty graphics. And he uses that, he's been accumulating links to interesting project people, ideas for over 20 years. So now he can navigate that knowledge base and he's very fluent in it. Yeah. He's mastered a ton of amazing knowledge. And he has access. So he's able to draw links for you. If you go to him, he's able to say, oh, maybe you should talk to that person. Are you aware of this? Or are you, because he has this huge database of curated knowledge at his disposal. That's his practice individually. So the people who he's attracted around that core practice are, again, people who are looking for solutions. You're absolutely right, Bentley, but who do come from this, let's think outside the silos. And let's see what else is there. And that's when I started by saying we're a group of connectors. I think that is core to what the practice is.
That's a good idea. I mean, that's a good phrase.
Almost everywhere I've gone in terms of like the direction of digital democracy, collective intelligence, AI, as I'm like, you know, connecting with people on LinkedIn, everyone I'm reaching out to knows Jerry. It's like he is a super connected person, and like it is actually mind-blowing every time he drops a link in his brain, because it's like, wow, this is such useful curated knowledge about this super niche subject I have never heard of, and yet here you are like just putting it there, and it's awesome. It's like what I understand people are trying to do with like Rome. It's like Jerry's been doing that for 20 years. So first of all, kudos to you guys who are working on freeing Jerry's brain. And two, yeah, like I'm just kind of interested in being in Jerry's community because he's very well connected. And he's also just like a really great leader and guy too. Like I love his leadership style. He's just super light touch, super funny, like very engaging. So like, I just also want to be around that just to like learn. Because my form of leadership is like being loud and clapping, you know, and Jerry's is like humor, like we're going to be cool about this. So it's just, he's a fantastic person. I'm just really interested in being connected with him. And just the fact that there's so much overlap and interest is awesome. Even though like I tend to be more action oriented, I can definitely appreciate, because CDL has done this in terms of stewarding community and finding identity and having like really important, worthwhile conversations, which just seems to be where OGM is at, like the worthwhile conversations. And I don't doubt there's going to be groups splitting off from that once they find alignment and overlap.
So we're about 15 minutes in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, anybody want to say anything else as it relates to CDL on that, or should we move on to the next topic?
I'll just say maybe one thing, which is not exactly CDL, but something I was bringing into CDL. It's about business models. And of course, it's my idea of business models for myself. I think it applies to CDL. I think it applies to Society Library. I think it applies to a lot of things. I mean, if we're talking about making conceptual maps and having a huge knowledge graph, right? What is the, sorry, I wrote that somewhere and I just want to have it on hand because I wrote it. What are the obvious practices that can make money out of building that skill of map making and map curating? Of course, there's, you know, you create map on behalf of someone else, some organization who needs their own knowledge maps. Of course, creating, and that's something you've touched a lot on, Jamie, creating self-contained curated subsets for education purposes. That's one clear aspect. Teaching map making is, you know, certification. I went into, you know, we're giving kind of this is how you properly do a curated map, and that becomes a stamp of approval and all the teaching. But I think a key thing is aligning these specific organization or project specific maps with a more global map. And this is why the idea of map meshing is so important to me. And using that as a basis to broker alliances, you know, connecting people and projects. And being a matchmaker, I think, is an important activity. No, totally. That's something I've been discussing with Jack for a long time, this matchmaking as a core activity. But based on this possibility of aligning, you know, this is this project, this is this community's map, and how does it connect to the global maps or the federated map, as we put it.
So I think funding models are an important topic that I think we should dedicate a whole meeting or series of meetings to.
And I can share
I'd rather
how
not
we've been
dive into it right now.
Yeah, and I can share how we've made money.
Yeah.
How we continue to make money.
But
also, something I wanted to say, Marc-Antoine, about map meshing is, like, I just highly encourage, I don't know how many maps you've looked at, but like, just start from real data. Like, the climate web is now freely available, and just see how that's organized, because it may be so non-standardized. If it's handmade, it's like impossible to mesh, you know? So that's just all I have to say about that, is if anything is like hand done, like, it may be it may be better just to redo the whole damn thing as opposed to try and mesh it with anything else. However, if there is like a platform or a system people can build on, such that how they're building it is so rigid that it's easy to mesh. I mean, I think it's what a lot of people here are talking about in terms of being able to crowdsource that kind of stuff. But
I don't think rigidity is the answer. I think flexibility is the answer, in being able to put many flexible systems on many, maybe rigid frames or flexible frames, but being able to be very flexible in how you connect things.
Got it. All right, here's something that I want to talk about since we have Ysaurus here. Hey guys, okay, so CDL has debate mapping and argument mapping. Oh, sorry, do something going on, Josh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Are you distracted? Is now a good time?
Well, I
think I'm good, yeah.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about, what I was interested in. So, you know, within CDL, we have debate mapping, argument mapping technologies.
I got it.
I think it's Bentley has curated a list. I've also updated a list of like over 100 argument mapping projects as well. So, like, what's next for Ysaurus? Bye, Josh.
Well, Jamie,
I'm here.
Hey, Jamie, let me just take an option for redirect. So the Ysaurus guys are new here, and I think we jumped in and threw out our topics, and I don't know that, and they had some topics, and I don't know that we've given them space to talk for us to decide on what topic about. So I want to explicitly ask Gene and Josh what y'all would like to add to that topic list before we dive in, if anything.
The topic list. Do you mean
just what to discuss for the next 30 minutes or in future meetings? Yeah. So just y'all brought some things up in Slack.
I mean, I think at a very high level, the last time we all chatted with you guys, we did a lot of talking and showing slides, and you guys asked us a bunch of questions, and that was great. And I think that at a high level, what I'm hungry for is, I don't know, is to listen a little bit and to hear what's on your minds, what your thoughts, reactions, were to that, to that presentation, and where it takes you. Obviously, if you have more questions for us, of course we're here and totally happy to answer them. But I kind of want to know what you think, if that makes sense.
Okay. Is everyone interested in going and having that conversation?
Yeah, and I think that's where Tim was going to go anyway. So
Okay.
I was going to go a slightly different way, which was focusing on the modeling of the debates, the argumentation model specifically, so that we could kind of align a little bit terminology. We never finished our glossary, but there's still like certain concepts that I think I haven't. I see are either missing or hidden in Ysaurus that would be good to kind of expand maybe your vocabulary on. So giving you feedback to your presentation is to me a separate thing, and maybe we can start there because the presentation was our last meeting, and it would be good to do that now before any more time goes on, I think.
Well, I'd like to start and go first and just say that, especially since like you showing your work made me go like, I have a personal tension. I'm going to use it as an example so that the community can be more aligned overall, to say that like your project is fucking awesome. Like your presentation is so good. Like I really appreciated like your whole introduction. I think I said this last time too, like you presented very well. And just, I think we can all appreciate like how difficult it is to create that technology. And I think it's really wonderful. And I mean, that being said, like something that I just want to acknowledge too, is that like, I think I said a little bit earlier, like I've seen like 160 of these projects. And so like, for me, like what I'm really interested in learning is like, what's next for Ysaurus? Because I've seen these fail for like 6 years over and over and over again. Like, that's why my nonprofit organization takes like the almost exact opposite approach. Is because I've seen this exact model fail. And so like, I would love to have conversations about like taking what I've learned and just offering it and like really encouraging, Marc Antoine, make that 40 years, right? So it's like, I want to know like what's next for Ysaurus, but I do want to encourage you, like it is awesome. Like, and the way that you sell it, Josh, is really fantastic. Like it's probably the best presentation of an argument map I've really ever seen. And I've seen a lot of those videos. So yeah, I just want to give you kudos and, again, welcome to the group. And I hope like these conversations could be of help. And I'm really interested to learn like how the model will adapt to like survive and make that difference that I know you and like pretty much anyone in this space really wants argument maps to make.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. One thing I will offer too is that, maybe Tim, this is what you're getting at in terms of like refining vocabulary, but when it comes to decision making, like one of the things that's important about Debate Map, which is the tool Society Library uses, is that you can break down arguments into claims, and we have a specific definition for what a claim means. And what's cool about that is that there may be various like Bayesian decision making like models that we can actually plug into for like really sophisticated weighting and decision making based on like this whole like industry of like weighted mathematical decisions based on like metrics and weights that we can add to like various meanings. But because we break down language to a certain like degree of what we call the base unit of logic, which is just a claim, and we build arguments from those claims, we're able to eventually one day plug in and have sophisticated decision making. So one of the things that I think I saw about Ysaurus is that it's more of like a general comment box. And even though like you have to balance like what is too much for the user to get, like, oh, I need to break down my argument into the claims that make up the argument. That may be too much for like a user to crowdsource an input. Like there may be like an interesting application in which you have that refined on the back end, just so you can save yourself a lot of trouble in terms of the decision-making calculations, and make that more refined by just plugging into any of the existing models that were made by super smart academic types. And you can compare and contrast them too.
We have different perspectives in this group, but the claims as a unit is pretty fundamental, and I think we did all agree on that. I'm trying to go finer in that for me, the claim is about linking certain definitions, saying, you know, this event can cause this event, for example. Well, I mean, the claim is the causal link, but the events or entities involved are components, and analyzing them in terms of what claims are true about these that make them into a distinct unit, so that we may find, okay, what other claims are true about these entities. I'm now thinking about claims as part of the definition, because they're often part of distinct woes when there's disagreement about a definition. That's something I'd like to get into. So in a way, I'm moving away from pure argument mapping, because I'm not just looking at the argument links, but at the causal link, ontological links, and so on, epistemological, like why do we believe this is true, and so on, and analyzing at that level. That's a distinct analysis. And as I said, I'm moving away from argument mapping, of pure argument mapping. And not everybody is here. So that's my reaction. I'm looking at the next step. But that doesn't invalidate, and I agree with Jamie. I've seen a lot of argument maps, some very good, some less good. Yours has a very clear presentation style. I think that the links between arguments and new questions could be clearer, but that's just my emphasis. That's my reaction.
I guess I could react more concretely, kind of more directly, in the sense of comparing it to the other platforms we've seen, to the platforms we've worked on, to the model that we've been discussing here, right? Some of the possibilities that we haven't even decided that should be part of the canonical debate or not. There's a long list of these things, so I'll just bring them out in kind of order of what comes to my head. But what, like, the first thing is, like Jamie said, there's a lot of different projects that have tried this sort of thing. And in our previous meeting, I asked, you know, how do you see yourself different from Kialo, right? Because Kialo, I think, is the state of the art, or really the state of the business, in terms of informal argument mapping or capturing debates of the public, right? You know, and they have a million contributions or whatever. They're growing. They have a slick presentation. It's a very clear interface for people to interact with, right? So what are the limitations in Kialo? You know, is Kialo already a success? Is that done, or is it not done? And if it's not done, what is it that it's missing that the Canonical Debate Lab would like to improve upon, right? And so, you know, the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about this is, I mean, bottom line is it's not canonical, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, it's just one more place people can go to debate, and it's hard to get people to really contribute or to really engage. You essentially have, okay, yeah, there are a lot of pros and cons we could discuss, but I think this is true fundamentally across the board. There is no canonical debate right now, and the fact that there is no canonical debate keeps people from really contributing. You get the people who like to debate or who want to kind of participate in a specific thing, and they may kind of peter out after a while, that sort of thing. But who I think is really missing from these debates is the people who really are closest to the sources of truth on things, right? You know, it's really easy for anybody to wander into a discussion about, for example, the one I've been participating in on why Soros is whether or not it's a moral obligation to vote for the lesser of two evils, right? So, you know, I come up with ideas and I throw them in there, but there are political scientists and philosophers and people who have doctorates in this sort of thing, who could totally blow my contributions out of the water and make them, just a small little, my contributions are almost meaningless at the level that I'm getting at. Essentially, I view the majority of people who have an opinion on a subject and who would enter a Kialo or would enter a Ysaurus or any non-canonical debate that's just out there for the public as superficial contributions, which are essentially opinions. And at some point you get to a level where you really want the people who know their stuff to be the ones to resolve these debates, or at least, pin things down to the actual.
But by virtue of the evidence they provide from that expertise, not necessarily from the expertise itself, right?
Right. No appeal to authority here.
My feeling about that last point is that the way from my intersections with people who are busier than I am, that the way to draw really busy people is the platform has to offer either money to them or it has to offer an audience. And I think that my strategic thinking is to build an audience, to draw them in, because I think that's a better way than money. So that's kind of, I agree that the ideal version has people like that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say there's two other ways. One, you be their friend, which is good
Sure.
old-fashioned networking and partying, and then two, appeal to ego. So something that we did for COVID Convo is essentially like, we built a platform. We didn't promote it a lot, but we built a platform where anyone could ask questions of an expert, and they were like pre-scripted questions and answers. And then like I know some scientists, and a friend of mine who's like just extremely well connected in terms of elite celebrity. She was like, how I get anyone to participate is like I literally appeal to their ego. Like, of all of the virologists, you're the virologist we've chosen to interview, and you just kind of treat people and imply the type of status that they want to be related to as having. So that's other two things too, is like the soft, squishy skills of just making people feel good and being their friend and calling in a favor.
Yeah, and that status comes from either ego or critical mass, right? Like, why do celebrities and well-respected people participate on Quora? Because the audience is huge, right?
Right. And something else too is that like not all experts are like the most famous experts, right? Like these could be grad students. Really brilliant grad students that you just like look through and find and see who's publishing papers, who's doing what. And if they want to start their career as being like more of a public intellectual mind, they would love this opportunity to jump on and share their ideas potentially. Or you could just appeal to the merit of the organization and the mission itself too.
Or just a grad student who is really, quite devoted towards interesting debate, towards, kind of reusing structured knowledge or whatnot. I mean, that, at least until we build some critical mass, is sort of like our ideal target is, find the perhaps under the radar expert who really knows what he's talking about and is interested in kind of engaging in this and building the structured knowledge that Kialo is not going after and kind of, I think we collectively are.
I agree with all that. What I meant, I guess, is at what point do you have someone like Tyler Cowen or Chris Hayes or, a bold-faced name who's going to say, this is a platform where I'm going to build an identity for myself beyond a single interview, but this is going to be something I'm going to maintain. And my feeling there is audience.
Got it. So here's something that you have to recognize that you're competing with when it comes to audience and these people sharing their ideas. It is like 1,000 times easier for them to do a television interview and go onto a podcast and just talk with their mouth than it is for them to like write and structure their arguments on a platform. So just when you're talking about getting audiences to put intellectuals' ideas in front of people, you're competing against podcasts and YouTube videos and television. And that's like something that needs to be reckoned with. And what also needs to be reckoned with is that like the public is not very used to argument maps. Like nerds like us would be very interested in seeing this structured argumentation, but the general public, like I imagine it's also 1,000 times easier for them to sit back and listen to a podcast or watch a video than it is to read, because that's kind of the age that we're in.
I think there's two goals here. One is to have a more exhaustive map. And in that case, you don't need the celebrities. You can have, as you said, a student who is willing to do the work of inputting the celebrities' ideas into a map. And the other is to have the celebrities involved in the process, which is of independent and real value. But maybe that, let's keep those distinct, and maybe the means for those are distinct.
Yeah,
and there's a tension
like,
there.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there's a serious tension there between this method of getting people involved and what I consider a principle of the canonical debate, which is that nobody owns an argument, right? Which means ideally you don't even highlight who created an argument for two reasons. One, if you say who created the argument, it could create instant bias for or against the argument based on who created that, right? And the second part is that bias would even be possibly misdirected because, for example, if I'm filling out a debate, I want to fill out all sides of the debate, and merely creating and showing my name with an argument that I've created should not imply that I agree with that argument, right? So there's a tension there in getting people based on essentially ego to participate or appearances.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. Like, I would say that it's hard to imagine not having some sort of identity on the community building side of it. Like, but from a pure value of the argument perspective, I would agree it should stand alone. The other thing I would say, in support of many of these points coming together is that it's absolutely the case that if David Brooks writes an article on the Times, or we're interested in Sam Harris's arguments on his podcast, right? We're not necessarily expecting them to build it, as Marc Antoine says. We're expecting community members to put that out there and call it a appeal to ego or whatever. But I think an ideal scenario would be David Brooks comes in and says, like, yeah, that seems to well represent what my article is saying, even if that's just a tweet, or whatever. And then from there, you can kind of, build on the discussion.
I think that's fundamental. I'm kind of between. I agree with him that nobody should own an argument, but I also believe in making clear who is behind that argument, and behind might mean approve of. And in some cases, we're speaking about specific formulations and making sure that, like, we do this work, or Jamie does this work, but it's also something I'm working on, this work of trying to unpack arguments. Somebody says this, what does it really mean? And unpacking arguments means at some point we have to get the original authors saying, oh, you got me totally wrong. Or yes, that is what I wanted to say, or here's a nuance, or whatever, right? And getting people to say, yes, this is what I said, or this is not what I said, and this is really what I said, which is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because that's part of unpacking.
Yeah, we have a form for that in our climate change project. When we would, and I think we did this before Kialo kicked us out. We would take quotes that people put on Kialo, and then we would write to the scientists and say, hey, someone made this claim, quoted your study. Is this an appropriate application of your research, and does your conclusion match with the conclusion presented here? And then these scientists would fill out forms, and they would say, like, yes, no, like this is the accurate way to interpret my work. And so we have like a list of forms that have been filled out from scientists, and we just didn't have the bandwidth to continue doing that. But that's like an element of the information integrity work that we do, is that, like, yeah, you actually have to check with the people who created it to, like, check it and be like, is this really what you meant? Because sometimes that's not the case.
I have a question, Tim, to circle back to something you said earlier. Tim or Timothy?
Tim.
Timbo. I'd be curious about how you mentioned that Kialo's not canonical, and Gene nodded his head as well. And my question is not to defend them, but I'd be curious to hear from you guys, like, what are the top 3 ways in which Kialo fails to be the thing that you guys want to make? What are the top 3 reasons why it's not canonical, why it's not your guys' goal? I asked this to learn about you, not to learn about them, I guess.
Yeah. One, there's no fact checking. There is moderation. there are moderators that will, oh, you're saying no, they fact check now? Do they do that now?
I'm saying fact checking has nothing to do with canonicality.
No, I think it was the top 3 reasons that were wrong with it in relation to what we care about.
It could be 3.
Yeah.
You guys don't all have to have the same reasons.
Okay, so,
I would just want to learn about what you guys care about.
Yeah. So one, I do want to also commend Kialo. It's sexy. It makes argument mapping sexy. Like, it's actually easy for people to work through. The complaints I have heard is that they do not match pro-con. So they just have like a list of pro and a list of con. They do not match them. That's something I've heard someone else say. My big beef is that they don't do the fact checking, right? Like the Society Library, we actually deconstruct and like trace the origin of things and yada, yada. Tim's so upset.
Right. But that's the crowdsourcing versus centralized thing.
Listen, all I'm saying is that if people were to do that on their own, of their own volition, if they knew how, they would be doing it on Kialo, and they don't, because
no, they would be doing it if Kialo were canonical, right?
Or if the process.
Which definition of canonical?
Yeah, I think.
So let me start with the definitions.
We have 2 in the glossary, right?
Yeah, let me start with the definitions of canonical, right? I have more than 2, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
One is the first one we were talking about, which is the chicken and egg problem, which is you can't create a site to be canonical in this sense. It's canonical as in it's the de facto place that everybody goes to debate these things, to add the information. So no site is canonical, and you can't really design a site to be canonical or a system. You can design it hoping that it will become canonical. And so that's one place it fails, and all of us have failed. And I don't blame them for it. It's just the way it is. The second definition is in terms of the canonicality of claims, meaning that a claim, you shouldn't have more than one copy of a single claim. Each claim is a singleton, and yeah, I know. But and then it gets down into the devil's in the details, right? So in the white paper vision of this, you can have more than one version of the same claim, meaning like 2 people submitted the same claim and people have started adding their arguments to it and so forth. But at some point, somebody notices that has happened, and there is a method to merge the 2, and it becomes one, right? So that is one part of it. The second part is that, you know, the reusability of a claim in arguments in lots of different debates, essentially. And then, you know, part of this, whether or not a claim is a duplicate or not, depends on how granular your modeling of claims is, right? Because Kialo is extremely informal about this. I think Wysaurus is pretty coarse-grained about this as well. It's the balance between formalization and informalization of how you want to model your claims. Because, you know, a very common example is, well, we can use our usual, you know, all men are mortal, right? And somebody else says most men are mortal, and somebody else says many men are mortal, right? Are those the same claim? Are they not? Are they, you know, how do they relate to each other? And how, you know, what if one person defines men by only male humans, and another defines men as male and female and all genders of humans, and another defines mortal? There are different definitions of mortality, right? And so how do you handle different definitions of mortal as well? Are different you know, depending on your definition, do you have different claims, or are they all considered to be the same, right? So that's some of the details of what we mean by canonicality.
My viewpoint. I did mention it's a small problem, but it's first agree with a lot of what was said. The issue of canonicality is absolutely key. I'm annoyed that it's a pure argument like pro-con as opposed to open up the question with a new question. I think that's fundamental to healthy debate as opposed to polarization. The point is to depolarize, not repolarize, and opening up the question is key to that. But at a more fundamental level, and this is something where Tim and I diverge up to a point, I agree with his notion of canonicality for claim unification. I think that's fundamental. But in terms of there being one place where the debate happens, I am interested in federating multi-places where debates happen. And, you know,
so
protocol
yeah,
exchange, and then it becomes one place in another way. Yes, I agree.
Right, that's what I was going to say is it might be conceptually one place. And
exactly.
Systems design is federated, yeah.
And that way, anything that doesn't have, I'm not saying open source, but at least an open standard format interoperability, I think that's fundamental. And I don't, Kelo has an API, but I don't know if it's that good about saying, but you know, there's this claim from this thing and let's make it part of the argument. And this is not about Kalo, that's all these systems. The notion that there should be one system to rule them all, I totally disbelieve.
Except for reason score. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Sorry?
I'm saying except for reason score, the one system to rule them all.
Oh, look at that microphone.
Yeah. No.
Bentley's
we're all very much kind of open source, decentralized, which is funny because we talk about canonicals in the name, which kind of implies centralized, but they are slightly different. And
they are different, absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
and that whole canonical thing is a hard nut to crack, and the merging of these two things and matching is a hard nut to crack. So
absolutely.
It's also just not just a tech problem. It's also just how do you do it?
Yeah,
which we're getting
the
there.
epistemology of it, and how do you make that understandable? And that's the debate we keep having about curation between Jamie and the rest of us. Yeah.
You need curation to get to crowdsourcing. That's just the only way. You got to do the practical.
It's one way. It's one. Okay, here, and here is something that one of my strong beliefs is progressive formalization. Like, not everybody thinks formally. Training people to think formally, as Jamie is doing, is one great way to do it. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's totally valuable. But I think that letting people input very informal arguments, but then making it easy to refactor them into something more formal progressively. And this is why asking them, is this really what you said, is extremely important, because if you're going to formalize on someone else's behalf and crowdsource the formalization, it means checking at every step. And then getting people trained in that process, seeing their own argument formalized into how you could be a bit more formal the next time, until people get quote unquote, badges for being able to do this part of the formalization process.
So as far as like just this one specific thing, because it's come up twice now, the thing about checking what somebody said and that sort of thing, I don't see that as being a function of the canonical debate system. Because, for example, it doesn't matter if somebody said something like so-and-so said this and so they meant that, right? Okay, you could create a claim disambiguated on each version of every possible interpretation of what they said, and then you can debate whether each interpretation is true or not, right? It doesn't matter what they really meant. It matters when, for example, you go to the level of the example you gave, which is you're using that as evidence to support something, right? Now, in that case, what that person said, what they actually meant, becomes a debate, and it can be debated there, right? And you could put as proof, so-and-so said in this external place, this is what they meant, right? And that could be the winning proof, right, for that debate. But I don't see it as a function of the actual platform. Like, I don't, okay, Kialo or something that's centralized, or a society library that prides itself on quality, can go ahead and have people doing fact checking. That's fine. But if it's fully crowdsourced, you don't need it, right?
I would distinguish between the veracity of the claim itself and the platform aspects of the claim. right? Because to the extent we have a community that we're building these claims and we care about fostering the community and whatnot, we do care about people's contributions and or, you know, at least respecting the intent of their statements, but fully agreed that at the end of it, what we're most interested in is in the veracity of the claims. And whether they, you know, meant to say that or not, we're happy to fork off 6 different versions of the claim, and, you know, one of them represents it, you know, 5 of them will fall, you know, as long as we have, you know, a system to, you know, ultimately formalize that, you know, whatnot, which is something we are desperately lacking in many ways. And, you know, that moderation, merging, whatever feature set is sort of coming for us in you know, very fruitful area for conversation I'd like to have with y'all.
I just want to flag that we're running low on time, and I really appreciate you guys devoting so much time to the conversation as it relates to our project. And I've learned a tremendous amount about what you guys prioritize, and I know that I have much more to learn. But for the rest of the meeting, I don't, you know, to set us up for the week ahead, if you guys, I don't, if there's other things you want to cover, or if you have ways to frame up the next few minutes to set us up for a good week.
I think I think that's a good point. And with 7 minutes left, I think the only thing we could do is to figure out what topic we want to talk about next week so people can think about it.
And if there's any homework.
I'm not even sure this group could do that in 7 minutes.
Yeah.
I'd also like to ask, how do you guys tend to have these conversations offline? Like, I mean, you know, Slack only goes so far, and for developing some of these ideas, I have notes on at least 6 things I'd love to keep unpacking with you here. Like, you know, we talk about dog fooding Lysaurus for some of these things, but do you have a better place to do it than Slack channels, or is that pretty much your default?
No, just Slack, and then maybe also picking someone and scheduling a meeting with them, because it's really hard to get calendars together. But like we were going to get together and talk rating systems. But what we might do with that also is always post them in the Hangouts, so that if anyone happens to be available. But no, right now it's just Slack,
Google
white
Docs,
paper.
a lot of white papers. Like sometimes we end up saying, okay, this is how I see this, and developing, commenting. We use Google Doc a lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So if you want to do a collaborative on a specific topic, we'll sometimes create a doc. And we do. So yeah, it's a good point. We have a Google Docs folder that's shared.
You know, there's, you know, something, 2 points on that I would like to bring up real quick. First is I really liked when Jamie was leading us into, you know, everybody write your ideas and then we'll try to bring them together, right? And I see that OGM is doing that sort of thing. It's a technique I haven't been familiar with, but I think that's an excellent way to do it. And it's also how the Federalist Papers were written and stuff like that. Okay, so one thing is we could pick a topic and have people write their own view on each thing. Second thing is we have actually a Medium publication that is totally unused, and we're not getting our ideas out in the public because nobody has the patience to do that. So I'm wondering if we could start this as kind of a practice we do every week to pick a topic that we want to have each person spill their thoughts on and then try to bring them together. And if we could somehow spill them into Medium as a constant, this is what we're thinking about this week, and this is what we're, you know, to open up the conversation essentially. Thoughts?
I'd be game.
Yeah, so is that continuing what we already started or doing a little different?
Okay. Well, I think that, yeah, I pointed out we all wrote these one-pagers and we didn't work on combining them yet. I mean, it's like what happened in the OGM, by the way.
That would be great for next week.
I think that would be a good, and maybe you, Josh and Jane, should also have your one-pagers ready. You have the link that Bentley just put in has our one-pager, so you can read them and you can see.
That links to the main folder, which has everything. I'll send a more specific link, but I'd like for y'all to request access on that top folder, and then I'll grant you access. And then you have access to everything. And then got to remember what folder we put our. I think
just
it's in
grabbed
here.
it. What are the one pagers on though? Just overall perspective of everything, or
From each of
perhaps-
us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, even more interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Wasn't it phrased? What are our top goals? What have we accomplished so far, and what are we hoping to gain from participation? I think was a good specific phrasing.
Yeah.
Yeah, would be happy to do that. I'd also, which I think is kind of more towards Tim's point, is if we wanted to pick a topic, I would love to, write a one page on that and ahead of the discussion just to kind of kick things off. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, as I see, the one pagers are more like the big vision you have in your head. Like, where would you want things to go if in the future? Like what?
Sure.
What's the whole motivation? What's the end goal?
And let's spend time underlining these a bit, and then we'll pick specific topics. I think it is a worthwhile exercise to do specific topics. I totally approve it, but let's do the unification of the general thing, because we've kind of postponed that. And yes, I agree, Jamie, because we wanted to get on something concrete, but nonetheless, it's still worth doing, and we have lost momentum on that.
I'll put specific topics in Slack channels in the intro.
Are the one pagers in that Google Drive? I don't see them.
Yes.
I just moved them in now. So there's a folder personal one pagers, and then there's a one pagers folder in there. And so you see each one begins with our name, and this is kind of like your introduction to the group. And we just did it a couple weeks ago or something.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I gotta
So
pop
we'll-
off and go on to another call. But thanks so much, guys. I'll see you next time.
All right, bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Go ahead and close the
Bye.
meeting.
Bye, guys. Pleasure.
Great to see you guys here again. See you next week.
Yeah.
See you next
Everyone-
time.